Captain Vrix 9 adjusted his breathing apparatus for the third time in 10 minutes. The humid air of planet Verdania made his gills itch something fierce. Around him, the other cadets from the Galactic Defense Academy were setting up their standard-issue portable barriers with military precision. Well, most of them were. "By the 7 moons of Arcturus," muttered Lieutenant Zorb as he watched the human cadet through his scope. "What in the void is she doing now?" Cadet Maya Foster was, well, she was definitely not following protocol. While her alien classmates had spent the last 2 hours constructing an impressive fortress complete with energy shields and automated turrets, Maya was sitting cross-legged in a patch of luminescent moss, making what could only be described as cooing sounds at a 6-legged creature that looked like a cross between a hedgehog and a disco ball. "She's going to get us all killed," growled Sergeant Keth, his 4 arms working frantically to reinforce their perimeter. "The enemy simulation starts in 30 minutes, and she's having a tea party with the local fauna." The survival exercise on Verdania was designed to test their ability to defend against hostile forces in an unknown environment. Every previous class had followed the same basic strategy: fortify, arm up, and wait for the automated enemy drones to attack. It was textbook military doctrine, but humans, as they had learned over the past 6 months of training, were not particularly fond of textbooks. "Maybe she's lost her mind," suggested Cadet Threx, nervously polishing his plasma rifle for the 10th time. The stress of being the only human in our unit could have finally gotten to her. "Or maybe," Vrix 9 said slowly, watching as Maya gently stroked the strange creature's glittering spines, "she knows something we don't." The other cadets paused their frantic preparations to stare at him. Vrix 9's species, the Kalari, were known for their analytical minds, which was probably why he was the only one not completely panicking about Maya's unconventional approach. "Sir, with all due respect," Zorb said carefully, "she's literally feeding berries to something that could be venomous. How is that tactical knowledge?" Before Vrix 9 could answer, Maya's voice drifted over to them. She was talking to the creature in that peculiar way humans had of addressing non-sentient beings as if they were old friends. "Oh, you're a clever little guy, aren't you?" Maya cooed, as the creature chirped and its spines shifted from blue to a warm golden color. "And you've got friends, don't you?" "Yes, you do." As if summoned by her words, more of the disco hedgehog creatures began emerging from the surrounding foliage. Then came others, floating jellyfish-like beings that pulsed with soft light, insect-like creatures with wings that hummed in harmony, and something that looked suspiciously like a walking flower arrangement. "This is insane," Keth muttered, his trigger finger twitching. "We should be preparing for battle, not hosting an interspecies meet and greet." But Vrix 9 was beginning to see a pattern. The creatures weren't just randomly gathering around Maya, they were positioning themselves in what looked almost like formations. The floating jellyfish had spread out in a protective dome overhead. The walking flowers had formed a perimeter, and the disco hedgehogs were arranging themselves in small groups at strategic points around Maya's position. "Cadet Foster," Vrix 9 called out, his curiosity finally overriding protocol. "What exactly are you doing?" Maya looked up with that infuriating human grin that somehow managed to be both innocent and mischievous. "Turns out the locals are a lot more helpful than our standard-issue defense systems." "Helpful? How, exactly?" Zorb demanded, gesturing wildly at their impressive fortress. "We've got energy shields, automated, turrets, motion sensors, and enough firepower to level a small city. What could a bunch of forest creatures possibly offer that we don't already have?" Maya's grin widened. "Intelligence, sir. And about 1,000 years of experience dealing with threats in this environment." Before anyone could ask what she meant, an alarm chimed in everyone's helmets. The enemy simulation was beginning. Vrix 9 felt his muscles tense as he took position behind their barricades. The first wave would come from the north, according to their briefing. Standard battle drones, armed with stun weapons and programmed to test their defensive capabilities. But as the minutes ticked by, something strange happened. Or rather, something strange didn't happen. The attack never came. Status report. Vrix 9 ordered, scanning the tree line with his rifle's scope. Motion sensors are picking up multiple contacts, Threx reported, his voice tight with confusion. But they're not advancing. They're just circling. Circling what? Keth demanded. That's when Maya stood up, brushing moss from her uniform with casual confidence. They're circling the pitfall traps, sir. The walking flowers showed me where the local root burrowers like to dig their hunting tunnels. Turns out, they're perfectly spaced to catch anything trying to approach from the north. Vrix 9 stared at her. So, pitfall traps? Well, technically they're root burrow hunting tunnels, Maya corrected cheerfully. But same principle. The jellyfish up there have been mapping the drone patrol routes with their bioelectric sensors. Apparently, they're really sensitive to artificial energy signatures. As if to demonstrate her point, one of the floating creatures pulsed brightly and let out a soft chime. Maya nodded, as if she'd understood perfectly. 3 drones just got stuck in the eastern trap cluster. She translated. The disco hedgehogs, Sparkles, and his family are keeping watch on the southern approach. Their spines change color when they detect movement patterns that don't match local wildlife. Zorb's weapon drooped in his hands. You named them? Just the Alpha, Maya said defensively. And technically, he told me his name. Well, not told exactly, but the color pattern when I asked was pretty distinctive. The absurdity of the situation was beginning to sink in. While they had spent hours building a fortress designed to withstand a military assault, Maya had essentially recruited the entire local ecosystem as her personal intelligence network. This is impossible, Keth protested. Interspecies communication doesn't work like that. You can't just walk up to alien wildlife and start a conversation. Maya shrugged. Maybe not for most species. But humans have been making friends with random animals for thousands of years. It's kind of our thing. Another chime from the overhead jellyfish, followed by a rapid color shift from Sparkles and his family. Uh-oh, Maya said, her casual tone taking on a note of genuine concern. Looks like the simulation just got an upgrade. The second wave isn't drones. What do you mean, not drones? Vrix 9 demanded. According to my new friends, there's something big coming from the west. Something that walks on 2 legs and thinks in straight lines. Maya paused, listening to a series of chirps and whistles from her assembled menagerie. Also, apparently it smells like metal and disappointment. Despite everything, Vrix 9 found himself fighting back a laugh. Metal and disappointment? That's how I interpreted the scent color combination, Maya explained. Could be wrong. My disco hedgehog is still pretty basic. The levity was interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush. Whatever was coming was big, mechanical, and making no effort at stealth. Battle mech. Threx breathed, his face pale with shock. That's a full military battle mech. Those aren't supposed to be part of the cadet simulations. Through, in the trees, they caught glimpses of something massive and metallic. The ground shook with each step, and the automated systems of their fortress began screaming warnings about incoming threats that exceeded their defensive parameters. Well, Maya said, her voice maintaining that maddeningly calm tone. This should be interesting. The battle mech burst into the clearing like a force of nature, standing 3 times the height of any of the cadets. Its weapon systems were already charging, energy crackling between its massive arms. The fortress that had taken them hours to build suddenly looked like a child's toy in comparison. Vrix 9's mind raced through tactical options. They could retreat, but that would mean automatic failure. They could try to fight, but their weapons were designed for drone-level threats, not military-grade combat units. But Maya was already moving, not toward their fortress or their weapons cache. Instead, she was walking calmly toward the battle mech, her hands raised but empty. Behind her, the entire collection of woodland creatures began to shift and flow like a living river. "Foster, what are you doing?" Vrix 9 shouted. "Something probably stupid," Maya called back. "But definitely human." The battle mech's sensors locked onto her, weapons charging to full power. Its voice boomed across the clearing with mechanical authority. "Surrender or be eliminated. You have 10 seconds to comply." Maya stopped walking but didn't raise her hands any higher. "Before we get to the eliminating part," she said conversationally, "can I ask you something?" 9, 8, 7. SIX. "Because you're standing on about 30 of them right now." 4, 3. That's when the ground beneath the battle mech simply disappeared. The massive machine plummeted into a network of interconnected tunnels that had been there long before any of them had arrived on the planet. Its weapons discharge lit up the tunnel system like a deadly fireworks display, but the sound was muffled by tons of dirt and root systems. Maya walked to the edge of the newly formed sinkhole and peered down with academic interest. Bigger tunnel system than I thought." The other cadets stood in stunned silence, staring at the hole where a military-grade battle mech had been standing moments before. "How did you know?" Vrix 9 finally managed to ask. Maya gestured to Sparkles, who was practically glowing with what could only be described as smug satisfaction. "He told me." "Well, showed me really. Turns out, the local wildlife has been dealing with big, heavy, metal things crashing through their forest for generations. They've gotten pretty good at it." From the depths of the sinkhole came the faint sound of mechanical systems attempting to reboot. "Is it dead?" Threx asked nervously. Maya said, pulling out a rope from her pack. "Just temporarily inconvenienced. We should probably help it out before it overheats down there." As she began lowering the rope into the hole, the other cadets slowly began to understand what they had witnessed. While they had been preparing to fight the simulation, Maya had been learning to work with the environment itself. "This is going to be a very interesting report to write," Vrix 9 muttered. Maya flashed him that grin again. "Oh, sir? We're not done yet. According to my friends, there's still a third wave coming, and this one's going to be really fun." The sound of aircraft engines began to echo through the forest canopy. "Fun?" Zorb asked weakly. "Well," Maya said, watching as her animal allies began moving into new positions with the smooth coordination of a well-trained military unit. "That depends on your definition of fun, but I've got a feeling we're about to find out just how creative local wildlife can get when they're properly motivated." The engines grew louder, and Vrix 9 realized that their survival exercise had become something else entirely. Something that would probably rewrite the Academy's training protocols. If they survived it. Maya was already talking to Sparkles again, her voice taking on that focused tone she used when she was planning something particularly outrageous. "Aerial assault, huh? Well, good thing we've got friends with wings." Above them, the harmonic winged insects began to gather in formations that looked suspiciously organized for random forest creatures. Vrix 9 found himself wondering, not for the first time, what exactly humans were taught in their planetary defense courses, because it certainly wasn't anything covered in standard Galactic Academy curriculum. The sound of the approaching aircraft grew to a roar, and Maya's smile took on an edge that made Vrix 9 suddenly very glad she was on their side. "All right, everyone," she called out to both her alien teammates and her woodland allies. "Time to show them what happens when you mess with the locals." The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. And somewhere in that moment of anticipation, Vrix 9 realized that maybe, just maybe, humans weren't as unpredictable as everyone thought. Maybe they were just playing by different rules. Rules that no one had thought to write down. The aerial assault began with all the subtlety of a meteor shower having a bad day. 6 combat flyers screamed over the treetops, their engines drowning out every other sound in the forest. These weren't training drones or even the battle mech that was still grumbling from its dirt nap. These were full military interceptors, the kind usually reserved for actual warfare. "This has got to be a mistake," Lieutenant Zorb shouted over the deafening roar. The Academy would never authorize live military hardware for a cadet exercise. Maya, meanwhile, was having what appeared to be an intense conversation with a cluster of the harmonic-winged insects. The creatures had arranged themselves in a perfect hexagonal formation around her head, their wings creating a sound that was almost musical, despite the chaos overhead. "Maya," Vrix 9 called out. "Whatever you're planning, now would be a good time." She held up one finger in the universal gesture for, "Wait a minute," which was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid given that 6 military aircraft were currently painting targets on their position. "Almost got it," she muttered, then made a series of clicking sounds with her tongue that somehow seemed to match the insect's wing patterns. "Okay. Got it. Everyone might want to cover their ears," Sergeant Keth demanded. "Why would we cover our—" That's when every harmonic-winged insect in approximately a 5-mile radius began to sing. Calling it singing was probably generous. It was more like someone had taken the concept of sound itself and decided to use it as a weapon. The frequency was so perfectly calibrated that it bypassed their hearing protection entirely and seemed to vibrate through their bones. But the real target wasn't the cadets on the ground. The combat flyers' sophisticated navigation systems, designed to filter out natural interference, had no defense against a coordinated acoustic attack from several thousand insects who had evolved specifically to confuse flying predators. The lead aircraft wobbled, its pilot clearly struggling with instruments that were now reporting 6 different altitudes simultaneously. The second flyer began spinning in lazy circles, its guidance system convinced it was flying upside down. The remaining 4 broke formation entirely, their computers frantically trying to recalibrate against an audio signature that kept shifting and changing. "That's actually brilliant," Vrix 9 admitted, watching the aerial chaos with professional appreciation. "Biological electronic warfare." "Oh, that's just the opening act," Maya said cheerfully, as the insect chorus reached a crescendo that made everyone's teeth ache. The real show is about to start. Above them, the floating jellyfish creatures had been quietly maneuvering into position. Now they began to pulse in perfect synchronization, their bioelectric fields creating something that looked suspiciously like a coordinated energy grid. Are they forming a net?" Threx asked, his voice barely audible over the sonic assault. "Not a net," Maya corrected, grinning as she watched her aerial allies work. "A cage. Made of pure electromagnetic interference. Those flyers won't be able to get a target lock on anything for the next 20 minutes. As if to prove her point, one of the combat aircraft fired a missile that immediately began chasing its own tail, apparently convinced that the largest threat in the area was itself. The pilot's voice crackled over the emergency frequency, sounding more confused than concerned. "Command, this is Alpha 6. Our targeting systems are completely scrambled. Instruments are reading. Wait, how can we be underwater and on fire at the same time?" "Because," Maya said, though the pilot couldn't hear her, "you're dealing with creatures that have been jamming predator senses for millions of years. Your computers are just the latest model of confused flying thing." But even as the aerial attack dissolved into chaos, Vrix 9 noticed movement at the edge of the clearing. Ground forces. And these ones looked like they meant business. "Maya," he said urgently, "we've got company." A full squad of combat androids emerged from the tree line, moving with mechanical precision. Unlike the confused pilots above, these units were designed for close-quarters combat, and wouldn't be affected by the acoustic and electromagnetic interference that had neutralized the air support. 12 units, Keth reported, his military training kicking in despite everything. Full combat load, energy shields, and they're spreading out to surround us. Maya looked around at her collection of woodland allies. The disco hedgehogs were brave, but they weren't exactly built for combat. The floating jellyfish were still busy keeping the aircraft confused, and the harmonic insects were starting to show signs of exhaustion from their sustained sonic attack. "Okay," she said, with the tone of someone working through a particularly challenging puzzle. "Time for Plan C." What was Plan C? Vrix 9 asked, though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to know. Make friends with something bigger. Maya put her fingers to her lips and let out a whistle that was somehow audible even over the insect chorus. It was a long, warbling sound that seemed to echo through the forest floor itself. For a moment, nothing happened. The combat androids continued their methodical advance, their weapons charging for synchronized elimination of all targets. Then, the ground began to move. Not shake, not tremble. Move, as if the forest floor itself was rearranging its priorities. "What did you call?" Zorb asked nervously. Maya's grin had taken on a slightly manic edge. "Remember how I mentioned the root burrow system was bigger than I thought? Well, I may have neglected to mention that the creatures who built it were also bigger than I thought." That's when the Verdanian forest titan emerged from what everyone had assumed was just another hill. It was approximately the size of a small building, covered in bark-like armor that was indistinguishable from the surrounding trees until it started moving. Dozens of smaller creatures scurried across its surface, tending to moss gardens and fungal growths that pulsed with gentle light. The combat androids, programmed for dozens of combat scenarios, apparently had not been programmed for giant walking ecosystem, decides to join the fight. "Threat assessment error," announced the lead android, its voice taking on the mechanical equivalent of panic. "Unable to classify target. Scanning. Scanning. Is this a geological feature? Or a biological entity?" "Yes," Maya called back helpfully. The forest titan regarded the androids with what could generously be described as mild annoyance. It made a sound like wind through ancient trees, and suddenly the entire clearing was full of movement. Every root system for miles around began to shift and grow. Vines erupted from the ground to entangle android legs. Tree branches bent down to pluck weapons from mechanical hands, and the walking flower arrangements that had seemed so decorative earlier revealed themselves to be mobile gardens with a serious attitude problem. "This is insane," Keth muttered, watching as a combat android was efficiently gift-wrapped in flowering vines. "Completely, utterly insane." "Yeah," Maya agreed happily. "Humans are good at insane." The battle, if it could be called that, was over in minutes. The androids found themselves thoroughly immobilized by a forest that had apparently taken their invasion personally. Above them, the combat flyers were still flying in confused circles, occasionally firing at clouds they'd mistaken for enemy targets. As the chaos settled, the Academy's emergency override finally kicked in. All simulation units powered down simultaneously, and the forest fell into an almost eerie quiet. "Exercise concluded," announced a voice from the sky. "All cadets report to extraction point for debrief." Maya was already saying goodbye to her allies, making those clicking sounds that seemed to serve as a universal thank you in the local wildlife dialect. Sparkles and his family clustered around her feet, their spines shifting through what looked like a pleased rainbow pattern. The forest titan rumbled something that sounded almost affectionate before sinking back into the earth, becoming just another hill, covered in innocent-looking moss. "How?" Vrix 9 asked as they gathered their gear. "How did you know they would help?" Maya shrugged, shouldering her pack. "I didn't. Not for sure. But I figured it was. It's worth asking." Most creatures don't like having their homes invaded by loud metal things that shoot at everything. Turns out, the locals had been dealing with these kinds of exercises for years. They were just waiting for someone to ask them to do something about it. But the communication barrier, Zorb protested, isn't as big as most people think. Maya finished. You just have to pay attention. Body language, scent markers, environmental cues. Humans have been reading animals for thousands of years. We're good at it because we had to be. As they walked toward the extraction point, Vrix 9 found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about military tactics. The other cadets were discussing the technical specs of the equipment they'd faced, analyzing weapons performance and shield efficiency. But Maya had won the exercise by making friends. There's going to be an inquiry, he said eventually. The instructors are going to want to know how you knew the forest titan was there. Maya grinned. I didn't. But I figured if you're going to ask for help, you might as well ask everyone who's listening. Worst case, nobody shows up, and you're no worse off than before. And best case, you find out that the forest has been paying attention all along, and it's got some opinions about uninvited guests. The extraction shuttle was waiting for them in a clearing that definitely hadn't been there that morning. As they climbed aboard, Vrix 9 noticed that Maya was still making those clicking sounds, apparently saying goodbye to creatures he couldn't even see. Cadet Foster, he said formally, once they were airborne. That was unconventional. Yes, sir. Maya agreed, not sounding particularly apologetic. It was also brilliant, effective, and probably going to revolutionize how we approach environmental combat scenarios. Maya's eyebrows rose. Really? Really? Though I suspect you're going to spend the next few weeks explaining exactly how you managed to negotiate a mutual defense pact with an entire ecosystem. Oh, that part was easy, Maya said. I just asked nicely and offered to help with their pest problem. Pest problem? Maya gestured toward the window, where the disabled combat equipment was being carefully extracted from various root systems and vine tangles. Military exercises that keep disturbing the neighborhood. Turns out, they've been wanting to do something about that for ages. Vrix 9 stared at her, then began to laugh. It started as a chuckle, then grew into the kind of full-body laughter that happens when the universe reveals a joke you hadn't seen coming. End quote. You turned a combat exercise into a community service project, he managed between laughs. Well, Maya said thoughtfully. When you put it like that, it sounds almost reasonable. The other cadets were staring at both of them now, clearly wondering if the stress of the exercise had caused some kind of breakdown. But Vrix 9 couldn't stop laughing, because somewhere in the space between Maya's unconventional tactics and the forest titan's protective instincts, he'd realized something important about humans. They didn't just adapt to environments, they made friends with them, and in a galaxy full of species that conquered, cataloged, and classified everything they encountered. Maybe what the universe really needed was someone who stopped to ask the locals what they thought. So, Maya said, settling back in her seat as the academy came into view. Same time next week? Next week? Advanced survival tactics. I heard we're doing underwater scenarios on Aquarius Yeti. I'm really looking forward to meeting the local marine life. Vrix 9's laughter turned into something that might have been a groan. Maya, please tell me you're not planning to recruit an army of sea monsters. Maya's innocent expression was absolutely convincing. Right up until she winked. I guess we'll find out, won't we? As the shuttle touched down at the academy, Vrix 9 realized that their training was far from over. But for the first time since joining the Galactic Defense Force, he was genuinely excited to see what came next. After all, if Maya could turn a forest into an ally, what could she do with an entire ocean? The thought